You're watching User Update, and this is a camera comparison between a 2017 mid-range phone, a 2019 ultra premium high-end phone, and a 2020 premium high-end phone. Today, I'm comparing the 2017 Nokia 6 to the 2019 iPhone 11 Pro Max and the 2020 Apple iPhone 12. Now, this video is going to be a bit different from the other videos. I'm just going to do a bit of slideshow, a bit of analysis, a bit of slideshow, maybe some more analysis, and then a slideshow. Before we get into the slideshow, I just want to let you know my quick overall opinion and sum everything up. Overall, I would say that the iPhone 11 Pro Max is probably my favorite shooter of the bunch. However, I would say that between the 12 and the 11 Pro Max, it was hard to decide which was better. They were trading blows. At times, the 11 Pro was better. At times, the 12 was better. Maybe from a technical standpoint, one could argue that the 12 is probably the best of the bunch. But I would say that overall, maybe from a subjective point of view, the iPhone 11 Pro Max was my personal favorite of the bunch. From my findings, I would say what I thought was quite interesting was that the Nokia 6 was not that far behind. A mid-range phone is not a terrible camera. Even an old one will give you serviceable images that you could use for sharing on social media. In the case of the Nokia 6, I picked this up for 50 bucks. It was used, perhaps refurbished, because it seems to be in mint condition, even though it's a 5-year-old phone. For the 11 Pro Max, which I'm shooting on, got this one, actually I bought this one in Hungary, and it was extremely, extremely expensive. It was for roughly 14,000, almost 15,000 euro. It's a really expensive phone. I mean, a really, really expensive phone, as in nagyon drága volt. In the case of the iPhone 11 Pro Max, I don't necessarily think that these ultra premium high-end phones, like these expensive phones, are not necessarily worth it. Because on the other hand, I got this phone. This is the iPhone 12. And this was actually gifted to me by my siblings. My brothers actually sent this as a gift. It cost them 700 euros, $700 at the time. What I would say is that you don't need to spend more than $700 on a phone. Like, I would say that the cutoff for an ultra premium phone, or the cutoff for a good, if you want a good flagship, a good high-end phone experience, you do not need to spend more than 700, 800 bucks on a phone. Because again, like I said when I started off this video, the 11 Pro Max and the 12 are trading blows in this camera comparison. Like they're toe-to-toe, literally on the same level of performance. It's hard to distinguish which is better. And in several shots, the iPhone 12 comes out on top. And again, 700 versus 1400. This came out a year after the iPhone 11 Pro Max, and it cost half the price. Half the price for the same or better performance. It does not make any sense to be getting these 1400. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to spend that kind of money on a phone, to be quite honest. I don't think it's worth it. I think that there's a particular performance curve. Obviously, cheap phones, you get what you pay for, but as you go up in the pricing scale, the return on investment starts to level out. And I think that when you're going above $1,000, you're not really seeing the value that you're supposed to be seeing. I would say you want a good high-end experience, spend somewhere within the $700, $800 range, 800 euro range, and you will find a good experience, especially if you want a camera. Now, another thing that I want to say is that in terms of camera performance, if we're comparing a mid-range phone to a high-end phone, high-end phones have the particular advantage in the case that when it comes to low-light photography, sunset, nighttime photography, these kinds of high-end phones have a very, very clear advantage over any kind of mid-range phone. That's where they excel in, is those kinds of low-light photographies, because mid-range phones, entry-level phones, budget phones, all of those phones, they just do terribly in such conditions like that. They look very blurry, they're having lots of noise, or they're just doing all kinds of weird stuff when they're on auto mode. They just simply cannot handle low light. Comparing flagships to mid-rangers, I could say that flagships definitely do better in low light. But another finding that I have is that also when you compare newer phones to older phones, they're also doing better in low light. Now, this is newer than the 11 Pro Max, but this is also doing better in low light. That's also showing the timeline or the history of camera design or camera technology in smartphones, is that more high-end phones are doing better in low light. Also, newer phones are doing better in low light. So if I was, for example, we didn't compare this in this particular camera comparison, but if there's a future comparison that I could show this, I could prove this to you, that a newer mid-range phone would actually do better in low light than an old mid-range phone, because that's just where the technology is going. Another finding that I had during this is that the Nokia 6 did not do as terribly as I thought it would. While it is an older phone, it's also not terrible. Let's say like a good sunlighting or a good lighting sort of condition. Maybe you're outside at noon in the middle of the day, on a sunny day, in the middle of a park. There's lots and lots of light. It would be hard to even distinguish a mid-range phone from a flagship phone. They're both going to take stellar photos because they have plenty of light. Now, flagship phones, they tend to have lower f-stop number. So because of this, they're taking in much more light. That's also part of why they do better in low lighting conditions like sunset or nighttime. But overall, if you have a ton of light, if you have an abundance of light, if you will, both mid-range, flagship, they're going to be in a similar playing field where it would be hard to distinguish between the two. As soon as the lighting goes down, it will get worse. If I could break it down into a few points, old mid-range phones aren't as bad as you would initially assume. They're totally okay if the lighting conditions are superb. They'll shoot just fine. Newer phones and more expensive phones tend to take better pictures in low lighting conditions or nighttime conditions, sunset, etc. When it comes to newer, more expensive phones, I think there is a sort of pricing curve, whereas if you spend too little on a phone, you're not going to get the best camera. But then if you spend too much on a phone, the difference between a $700 phone and a phone that's more than $1,000 is not that big of a difference, where I would say, oh yeah, get the most expensive phone because that will have the best camera. That's no longer the case. You could easily get the best or near best or close to the best or as good as the best for practically half the price, as exemplified in the case of the iPhone 12. So with all of my summary said, let's get into the slideshows and some of my analysis of the photos that we're going to show. You could leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. Let me know what you think is the best camera phone of the bunch. And let me know if you're also surprised that the Nokia 6 did not do as poorly as you thought it would. Because that was, for me, I think the most interesting finding out of this camera comparison. So enough of me yammering, and let's get into the camera comparison and look at some of these photos. We have the side-by-side cat in a window comparison. When we look at the cat in the window, I would say of these three photos, my favorite, shockingly, and I'm not trying to be ridiculous here, my favorite would honestly be the Nokia 6. And here's why. Clearly, The iPhones are taking better photos here. The iPhone 12 in particular has what I think is the most overall detail. If you look at the stone or the stucco outside of the window on the wall, you try not to mind all of the smudging on the windows. Really, I gotta clean my windows better. The fur has a good amount of detail, but what I would say is that the detail on the fur is the highest on the iPhone 11 Pro Max, the photo in the middle. But the Nokia seems to have the best rendition of the foreground. The color of the fur, the color of the foam pads that the cat is laying on, this red colored pad is the most realistic. The color of the fur is the most realistic. What I would say is that I've noticed in both the iPhone 12 and the iPhone 11, the picture has this sort of bluish kind of haze or a blue casting, which isn't really there in real life. It wasn't really, the lighting was not that cool. And I feel like there's some kind of something going on that made the image more cool. Now, by far, I would say both the iPhones, they knocked HDR out of the park. When you look at the detail in the sky, you could see the clouds, you could see the blue, you could see the white. You could really, really, really see the detail in the sky. And the Nokia 6 completely messed that up, completely blew it. The sky in the Nokia 6 is completely overblown. It is just completely white, and even the detail of the trees in the background seem to be consumed by the brightness of the sky. Again, what I would say is that from a technical level, there's a lot of trading of blows here. The iPhone 12 has really good detail. Outside of the window looks really, really good. But then for the iPhone 11 Pro Max, I would say the sky rendition or the reproduction of the sky looks really, really good. But overall, somehow my favorite still, in terms of depth, in terms of color, in terms of like the mood and feel, would have to go to the Nokia 6 in this comparison, only because I like how the foreground was represented so well. The color, the overall warmth of the photo, I would say is the most realistic to what I saw with my eyes. Going back to fur detail, I would say that the iPhone 11 Pro Max seemed to handle the fur detail the best, especially when separating the fur from the foreground and background. If you look at the middle of the cat, his name is Toast, by the way. If you look at the middle of the cat, you can see that the iPhone 11 Pro Max is really, really doing great job handling the fur. I would say that the Nokia 6 does a good job of capturing the fur on the head of the cat. What I did think is surprising is that the 11 Pro Max has a lot of noise on the red foam that the cat is laying on. And I thought that was pretty shocking. Whereas on the Nokia, you see that there's a lot of smoothing going on. While the color is consistent, smooth, and accurate, it does kind of look watercolory a bit. But honestly, out of all of the different representations of the red, I would say that the Nokia did it the most accurately, it surprised me. Now, again, going back to the iPhone 12, I would say that it did the best job reproducing the detail in the stucco. The stucco looks amazing in how the iPhone 12 handled that. Looking at the catnap photo, I would want to say that I think the iPhone 12 probably produced my favorite shot. But again, between these, it's really hard to decide. I think they're all good. They all look good to my eyes. I would just say that the iPhone 12 seems to have the best detail. It looks the sharpest and you see almost everything. Even when you zoom in, you see everything with a crystal clarity. If we zoom in and then we look at the detail of the fur around the ear of the cat, honestly, I would say that here, zoomed in, it looks like the 11 Pro Max might have the best detail. It just looks the sharpest, and I could see each of the individual blades of fur and hair and all of the follicles. I would say that maybe the win should go to the iPhone 11 Pro Max because it seems like it has the best detail in terms of all of the follicles and the each and every single blade of the fur and hair. But I would still go back to say that out of the three phones, I'm shocked by how close that they all are. Now, when we zoom in and we look at the paw of the cat, his little feet, I would say that, again, it seems like the iPhone 12 and the 11 Pro Max are trading blows. Now, this is gonna be subjective, but I would say that in this particular zoom, I could see better detail by a little bit on the 11 Pro Max in terms of the fur around the cat's eyes. But I think overall, if we're looking for the most suitable photo or the best overall detail, I would say the iPhone 12 seems to take the edge when it comes to overall detail in this one. iPhone 12 and 11 Pro Max leave the Nokia 6 in the dust. They leave it far behind. The Nokia 6 seems to just completely botch this part of the photo. When it comes to the detail in the fur, it looks like a watercolor. Just, you don't see the individual hair follicles anymore, and they're all blurred together. In my opinion, it just looks kind of bad, actually. It's just really mixed together. It looks a bit like a watercolor. And to top it all off, I would say this segment of the photo is overblown. It's just too exposed, like it's overexposed. The whites just seem to be really breaking down, and you don't really see a lot of separation between details here. For the Nokia 6, I would say that it did this segment of the photo the worst. When I compared the three photos of the pen holder, it's a nice little vase that seems, I just found it in my attic. Don't know where it's from or who made it, but I like it. It's a really nice looking vase, pretty to look at. Now, when I'm comparing the photos of the pen holder, I would say from a zoomed out perspective, just looking at the overall photo, for me, choosing a favorite out of this three is really, really hard. I would say personally that it's between the 11 Pro Max and the Nokia 6 that I would say are my favorite. I would almost go to lean towards the Nokia 6. And now remember, that's from a zoomed out perspective that I would say that my favorite seems to be the Nokia 6. Let's zoom in and start looking at some of the details. Honestly, also while zoomed in, I would say that all three of these cameras took this photo extremely well. It's hard to truly decide which one took the best one. However, zoomed in, now I'm gonna say that I'm leaning towards the iPhone 12, maybe in first place, iPhone 11 in second place, and then the Nokia seems to be dead last on this one. The actual way that it handles the white, the way that the Nokia 6 handles the white on the vase, again, it seems that the color white gets really blown out and any detail that's inside of the white part of the vase is completely lost and it just looks blurred and mushy. For the colored parts of the photo, I would say that the Nokia 6 does handle the color of the pens very well. I thought that was incredible. Probably has the most pleasing colors. The gold seems to pop and the rose gold also seems to pop. I would even say that the silver pen in the background also seems to pop. The way that the Nokia also handles roll-off and like depth of field, for example, the plug in the connector behind looks very blurred in a nice and pleasant way. Of course, the iPhone 12 and the iPhone 11 handles the same. They are able to get that same blurred effect as well. But I would say that the Nokia 6 does have pleasing qualities to its photo. However, I would say the photo with the most realistic colors overall, and especially the most realistic colors of the pen, would be the iPhone 11 Pro Max in the center. Again, it's trading blows with the iPhone 12. The iPhone 12 seems to be the most balanced performer. The way that it handles the white part of the vase, the way that it handles the white colors is really, really good. The iPhone 12 does that so good. However, I would say that the most realistic depiction of the color of the pens will have to go to the 11 Pro Max. Oh boy, this is a tough one. I genuinely can't say which is the best, but I would say that when we zoom in and we scrutinize this photo at this level of zoom, it's between the 11 Pro Max and the 12. Personally, I'm gonna pick the 11 Pro Max. And we got a little bit of low light action going on. The sun was going down, and then I thought, why not add some text on a crinkly bag so that we have lots of detail to try to get. We want the text to be as sharp as possible. And I think the reflectivity and the crinkliness of the bag also is going to give the cameras a bit of a challenge in reproducing that. Off the bat, from a zoomed out perspective, obviously the Nokia 6 does the worst job here. It is a terrible photo. The white balance is just awful. I do not know why the camera, and this is shot on automatic settings, I don't know why the stock camera decided to make the photo so bluish, or just I'm baffled by how it chose this particular white balance. That was obviously not the color within the room. As I mentioned, the sun was going down, so we should be leaning more to the warm side. Yeah, the Nokia 6 photo is just bad. Even from afar, it just looks way too blue. The white parts, which are now blue, but the white parts of the photo are completely overblown. Just the exposure is terrible, and already the text seems blurry even from this distance. So it's gonna be a rough one in this comparison once I zoom in. Whew. Yeah, the Nokia 6 is just terrible in low light. What I could say is that it did a good job when the lighting was good, but that's the main advantage that any flagship phone or any newer phone has over mid-range phones, and especially older mid-range phones, is that flagship phones, the more expensive phones, handle low light photography much, much, much better than any mid-ranger or any low-end budget phone could possibly even dream of. Just that's the bread and butter. That's the milk and honey. That's the whole point that a lot of people are going towards the flagship phones, is that they reproduce really good low light photos. And why is that important? Because it's important for interiors, it's important for nighttime, it's important for many situations where the lighting is, you're not gonna be in a super sunny, bright outdoor shooting environment every single time you want to use your photo. Sure, if you're walking in a park, then almost all of these phones will be on an equal footing. But the minute that you go inside, or the minute that the sun starts going down, you will automatically notice that the only phones that are still taking good photos are the expensive ones. So let's go into a zoom in shot and we could pick which is the best here. As I suspected, I think the iPhone 12 does this the best. From a zoomed in perspective, it seems that the iPhone 12 has the sharpest reproduction of the text. The text looks sharp and it's very, very readable. The graphic of the crackers on the wrapper is also very, very clear and of a high detail. I would say almost hands down, the iPhone 12 wins this one. The 11 Pro Max comes in a close second, but we do see the development of quite a bit of noise. I don't want to say that it's too noisy, but I definitely noticed some noise. I noticed that the text is not as sharp as it can be. There's a bit of fuzziness. For example, if you look at the SOU in the word source, you could see some fuzziness around the O and the U, for example. And obviously, we almost don't even need to mention this. The Nokia 6 completely dropped the ball on this one. It is a blurry mess. It is too blue. The white balance is completely off, and there is no detail in the cracker at all. It just looks like a fuzzy, blurry mess. I can't even call it a watercolor. I just don't know what the camera is trying to achieve there. Obviously, like I was mentioning before, that this is where most mid-range, low-end, entry-level budget phones, this is where the most of them are going to struggle when you compare them to flagship phones. They just cannot handle any level of low-light photography. It is what it is. Obviously, it's just how the technology works here. But yeah, what you could see from all of these zoomed in shots is that in an appropriate lighting or in good enough lighting, you could see that this phone can compete with flagships and produce likable images. But as soon as that light level goes down, it's just going to be a horrible, horrible experience. Basically, I would not recommend using this camera in anything but super bright lights. So you need to be either outside at noon in the middle of a park on a sunny day, or inside of a photo studio where you have tons of light everywhere, because otherwise this thing is just going to take really bad photos. But yeah, in this zoomed in comparison, I would say that the iPhone 12 solidly the winner of this one. Lastly, I would say before we wrap this up and I could close out the video with the final slideshow, I would say that all of this is great until you throw in another curveball, and that's compression. Now, when you upload photos to almost all forms of chat, messaging apps, social media, I'm talking about Instagram, Facebook, Telegram, WhatsApp, so on and so forth. When you upload photos to all of them, almost all of these companies are running their own compression algorithms. That means when you upload photos, these companies will compress the photos before putting them on the web. Whether it's WhatsApp, Instagram, Telegram, they're all doing it. Essentially, what this means is that whatever level of quality you think that your iPhone is producing, whether you think that it's like this completely high resolution photography that's going on, it doesn't matter. As soon as you upload this thing to social media or any one of these web services, that picture is going to be compressed. It will be made smaller, and it will be reduced in many, many ways that would actually surprise you. I'm going to show you how compression affects your photos, because I would say that this is indeed a curveball, because in a way, it's almost an equalizer. Why would I call it an equalizer? Because, for example, I've uploaded all of the photos that I've shown here to Telegram, and what Telegram does is to turn all of these photos into a 960p photo. That means the height of each photo will have a height or a resolution height of 960 pixels. So more or less, they become roughly the same size. And once they're all made smaller than their original resolution, the differences between them also become smaller. So I'm going to let you take a look at the photos in the compressed slideshow segment of this video, and then you could judge for yourself which now do you think is the best shooter amongst these. Because it's one thing to compare photos based on the original file size, the original photos, comparing what comes out of the camera untouched. It's easy to say this phone is better than that phone, but what happens when all of these photos are compressed when you upload them online? Now that's an interesting thing to look at. It may be subjective to decide which is the best, because essentially each of these photos have been edited, so it probably depends on how you like the editing that's been done. Also, I should point out that different websites and different apps and different social media platforms all have different ways of compressing these kinds of media contents. I've heard some say that Instagram, for example, does a great job when compressing iPhone photos, but makes Android photos look terrible. Again, look at the slideshow coming up, and then you could decide which you think is the best. And write it down in the comments. Let me know who you think the overall winner is. Again, if I have to pick one, I'm probably going to say that I like the iPhone 11 Pro Max overall the best. I do think that the Nokia 6 did a commendable job, but it did drop the ball in several photos. Overall, all three cameras are great, but I would still have to go with the iPhone 11 Pro Max as my personal favorite. It's the reason why I record so many of these videos using that particular phone camera. Check out the slideshow of the compressed images. They were all uploaded to Telegram and compressed with Telegram's compression algorithm. Again, let me know, write it down in the comments below, which camera you think is the overall best, judging from the original photos and also judging from the outcome of the compression algorithms. Well, this is the last that you're going to hear from me, and I'll talk to you all in the next one. Stay tuned for more videos from User Update.